Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is time and transformation. With me is Peter Russell, a visionary writer, a filmmaker, a management consultant. Peter is the author of numerous books, including The Creative Manager, The Global Brain, and The White Hole in Time. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
You've given a lot of thought to the issue of human transformation, particularly through time. And I think one of the real paradoxes of time is that while we divide it into present, past, and future, we seem to always be in the present. It's inescapable, and it sometimes makes me wonder if the past and the future aren't in some sense an illusion.
I wouldn't say an illusion. I mean, it's fascinating that in some senses there is only the now. That's all we ever know. The past is but a memory, and all that the memory is something which we draw upon and recreate now. If I think of the past, I'm thinking of it now, in the present moment. If I think of the future, I'm thinking of the future now, in the present moment. There is only now, in that sense. And yet if you look at it from the physical side, now doesn't exist. There is all the past, there is all the future, and then there's that point between them.
It's an infinitesimally small point.
So you almost have a paradox there. From the physics point of view, now doesn't exist, hardly exists, and yet from our own experience, there is only now.
And yet Einstein proposed that we view time as a dimension, a space-like dimension, so that if we could just stand back from it, we might see all of time just as we could look out over space.
Yes, well that's the physical point of view, except it gets very interesting because if you look at time from the point of view of light, if you follow Einstein's theory through, that when something travels at the speed of light, time slows right down, and at the speed of light, time stops, which means from light's point of view, there is only now.
There is no time. Well, there we come back to the illusion of the past and the future.
But what is fascinating, from the point of view of light, there is only the now, and from the point of view of human experience, from the light of consciousness, there is only the now. And so there's some very interesting parallel between the way the universe is seen from light's point of view and the way it's seen from consciousness.
I mean, I realize we're really plunging into things rapidly here, but let me just push it a little further with you. The Hindu concept of Maya suggests that the reality that we cling to, that we build our lives on every day. We wake up in the morning, we go to work, we progress from birth to death, in effect. The Hindus would say this is all an illusion, really.
Well, you can see Maya, I think, in many different levels. There's the Maya, we often translate it as illusion. There's the illusion, I think this is a solid object. When I look at it under a microscope or electron microscope, I realize it is 99.99% empty space with a few subatomic particles floating around. So that's one interesting way it's an illusion. But there's a second way which is this is an illusion, that I think this is outside. It's actually a construct of my mind. When I look at my hand, light is coming from my hand to my eye. It is becoming electromagnetic chemical impulse in the brain. And out of all that brain activity, I generate in my mind, in my consciousness, I generate the experience of a hand out here.
That's right.
And yet everything I experience, everything you are experiencing, everything we are experiencing at any moment, we are creating in our mind.
So sometimes called in our sensorium.
Yes, so we are continually creating our experience of the world. And that's another sense, I think a deeper sense in which the world is Maya and illusion. We think we are in touch with the world. What we have is this incredible generation power of the human brain to create reality.
Our ability to know whether our images of the world actually correspond to what the world is really like, assuming it exists at all, which I'm willing to assume,
I think
is limited.
I think it's clear something exists out there. There is an external reality. I think we can never fully know that reality. I think that's something which the philosopher Immanuel Kant was trying to say. We never fully know that reality. I mean, our senses are just a tiny, tiny window. We have a tiny spectrum in the electromagnetic spectrum that we see, which is visible light. And we have some senses, we have touch and smell, but our smell is nothing compared to a dog's smell. A dolphin has sonar senses, which we don't have, and snake has heat senses. We are just seeing a tiny partial view of reality. So reality must be much, much richer than we ever experience it.
Yes.
And what we do experience is just this creation in our own minds.
And we get caught up in our reality in the very limited sense. You know, as I say, go to work in the morning. What are my goals for the day? It's to provide shelter and clothing and to help raise the kids and put them into college, and hopefully we'll vote for the right political candidates. We live in kind of a narrow band of
and even that's
time.
something we're continually creating, and we may not create it right. We may see a person like we may see somebody on the street who seems to be homeless, and we may form some judgment about that person. And then when you start talking to them and you realize who that person is and how they came to be here, you may create a completely different perception of that person. So I think all the time we are creating our reality of who other people are, the people we work with, or people we see on television. We think, oh, that's not a very nice person, or that person's a wonderful person. We are continually judging and creating our perception of other people. I think that's something we have to be careful about, because it's so easy to misjudge other people.
And often our judgments, I suppose, are conditioned by very commonplace things, like what social class we may belong to.
Yes, and does this person remind you of someone else you know, and or even what happened to you, you know, in your own earlier experience in childhood or something. It may remind you of an aunt or something who you didn't like, and so you immediately start not liking this person.
One of the things I find very striking in your work is that you try to understand the now moment in terms of the whole history of the universe as we know it. I mean, many people take a large view. Goethe said you won't understand yourself if you don't understand all of human history, but you go much farther than Goethe.
Yes, I like to go right back to the beginning of the universe to see where we stand, because I think the times we are living through right now is probably the most significant time ever to have lived, not just as a human being, but I think on this planet. I think evolution has brought us to this point where we have a species which has a certain degree of intelligence, I think needs a bit more intelligence, which is capable of creating so much. I mean, we today can do almost anything we think of. We have the technology to do it. If we don't have the technology, we know how to invent it. And yet, at the same time, we could destroy ourselves. We could destroy a lot of life on this planet. And I don't think ever before, as far as we know, has a species arisen on this planet that has that power of creation and that power of destruction simultaneously. And what happens in the next 5, 10, 15 years, out of billions of years of evolution, these years that we, alive now, are living through, are going to be absolutely critical for the future of evolution on this planet.
It seems like an odd coincidence. It's as if, you know, you're born right there with front row seats at the 50-yard line for the Super Bowl or something.
Somebody had to be born in this time, and we happen to be the people who are born in this absolutely critical time in the whole evolution of the planet. Not just human history, but the whole evolution of the planet. It's like evolution has been working, I think, towards this point of an intelligent, creative species to see what it can do.
The very thoughts that we think in these years may affect the destiny of the entire planet.
Yes, yes.
That's very profound. That says that the now moment is pregnant with possibilities. This is not a trivial time.
It's not at all. And a lot of what I try to do in my writing and talks and films is to get people to step back and see the significance of these times, because I think so often we are engrossed in what we're doing, our work and paying the bills, whatever it is, watching television. We forget where we stand in history. And that's not to put a huge onus responsibility on us, but just to appreciate almost the magic of the time we are in.
But to be fair about it, Peter, I think throughout history, people have often thought that about themselves, that they were living in the momentous times.
And they were right. They were the most momentous times up to then. I'm sure, you know, if you were living 500 years ago, the beginning of the Renaissance, or Renaissance, however you say it in America, you would have said that was a critical time, and it was. It was probably the most exciting time so far. Or further back, the beginning of the whole Greek culture, that was the most significant time so far. But I think
well, those were crucial times.
they were, but today is far more crucial.
16th century Iceland might not have been so important.
Right, but what was happening then wasn't global.
Yes.
And there wasn't so much hanging in the balance as there is today. So that's why I think today is, let's put it this way, it's the most significant time so far. Maybe in 10 years' time we'll have more significant time.
Well, as you look at the whole process of evolution, beyond biological evolution, but the universe itself unfolding according to the scientific story we know, it seems to you in your writing that the universe is moving toward a kind of self-aware consciousness.
Yes. You can see the evolution as the evolution of matter, which is the way it's normally seen, which is how atoms evolved and got more complex and they collected together to form molecules, and as the molecules grew you had viruses and you had simple life forms, you had simple cells collected together and became more complex cells, and that whole growth up to beings such as ourselves, which is the normal way we look at it, the physical side.
Right.
But you can also look at evolution as the evolution of consciousness. Now, I believe all creatures are conscious. Even a simple amoeba is conscious. I don't think you can draw a line anywhere, because by conscious I mean a sentient being.
There's some awareness.
There is some awareness.
Perhaps not self-awareness, and certainly not language.
Exactly. A dog is aware. I think anybody who's had a dog as a pet, or a cat or a horse, they're clearly an aware creature. They cannot speak, may not be aware of so many things as us, but they're aware. Maybe a fish is aware, but not aware of so much. What's happened, if you look at the evolution up from simple cells, is that a bacterium is probably just aware of very vague sense of heat and light, maybe, or vibration. As organisms evolved, the senses became more complex. Eyes evolved, which could detect better spectrum of light and fill in the details, and hearing evolved, which meant the vibrations weren't just a sense of vibration in the body, you could pinpoint where the vibration was coming from. So the senses have been continually evolving, and with that we evolved brains, or life evolved brains, to process all that information that was coming in through the senses, and then to store it and remember it and then use it for later use. What happened with human beings is, in terms of our consciousness of the world around, I would say we're no different from dogs or horses. In fact, dogs are probably better than us. Their smell is better, and possibly their sight in some areas is better. But I think what is special about human beings is we've developed language. And with language, we can begin to share our learnings with each other. A dog learns basically from its own experience of life. We learn from our own experience, but we also learn from everybody else's experience who's gone before us. We learn from our parents. We learn at school the knowledge that has been built up in our society. So we are a collective learning system. We are building up this huge body of knowledge. So our awareness of the world is much greater than any animal's awareness, because we have this ability to share through language our learning. So we're building up this collective body of knowledge. And it started with language, whenever that emerged, or was it 50,000 years ago, we're not quite sure, something like that. And then we developed writing, which meant we could begin to record our ideas and take them to other people. And then the printing press, and we could reproduce ideas much faster. Then we've gone through telephones and things like that, and now we have computers and satellites beginning to link us together into one single informational unit.
It's as if what we're doing with the electronic communications linking the planet now is creating an extension of our own nervous systems.
Yes, very much. In fact, it's almost like we are the nervous system of the planet. There's an interesting idea which has been around for about 20 years, which was put forward by James Lovelock, an English chemist, who put forward the idea that the whole planet can be seen as a living organism.
The Gaia hypothesis.
The Gaia hypothesis, yes. Gaia is the Greek goddess of the earth, Mother Earth goddess. He called it the Gaia hypothesis, suggesting the whole planet is like one single living system.
Yes.
In which case, we must say, what is our role in it? You can say the rainforests play a role, and maybe certain bacterium play a role. Everything has its role to play in this huge organism. What is humanity doing here? And to me, there are two possible answers to that question, and maybe they're both true. One is we seem to be like a nervous system, because we process information far better than any other creature on this planet, mainly because we have language. So we are the information processor, which makes us like the nerve cells of this huge planetary organism, which is why I sometimes call humanity the global brain.
Yes.
The other possibility is we are a cancerous growth. because the planet has survived perfectly well without humanity for billions of years, 4.5 billion years, and now, just in the last 1 million years, which is 1/4000th of the planet's history, humanity arises, and then in just a tiny fraction of a second of the Earth's history goes crazy. We are destroying the planet like a cancer destroys a body. And it's interesting to take a photograph of a cancer in a body and look at a photograph of a way a city grows out into its environment. They're very parallel.
Well, I suppose in some existential sense we have a choice as to whether we're going to function as a cancer or as a nervous system.
I think that is the very, very real choice before us at this time. And it's a question of asking ourselves, what is it we really want? What is it that's really important in our own lives, to actually begin to think about how we act? Because if we continue acting in this careless, and it is literally a careless way, we do not care about others, we do not care about the environment. If we continue being careless, and that is really what a malignancy is, we will destroy our environment. And if we destroy our environment, we will not be able to survive.
Peter, let's step back once again and recapitulate this a bit from the long view of time, from the beginnings of the origin of the universe itself. You've written quite a bit about the anthropic principle and how it seems as if the whole universe was designed to support biological systems such as ourselves.
Yes, it's fascinating this. It's just come out the last 15 years or so that cosmologists and physicists started looking at the various fundamental constants. They call them the fundamental constants. These are things like the strength of the gravitational force, the mass of the electron, the charge on the electron, these sorts of things.
Which givens.
Are givens. And these are just numbers which we now know maybe to 8 or 10 decimal places.
They seem arbitrary in some sense, but they're
if you just look
unchanging as far as our scientific measurements indicate.
But what's fascinating is if you start changing these numbers by a tiny bit, the universe doesn't work anymore.
The way we know it.
Right. For example, if you make the gravitational force about 1% stronger, then in the early days of the universe, well, the early weeks to be exact, as the universe expanded, the gravitational force would have pulled it back together again, and the universe would only have existed for 4 weeks. If the gravitational force had been 1% weaker, then the universe would have expanded so fast it would never have slowed down enough for stars to form. So the fact we have a universe that lasted for more than 4 weeks, but also was one which stars could form in, depended upon the gravitational force being exactly the way it is. And there are now something like 40 coincidences like this.
All of which had to be just exactly perfect in order for us to be here where we are now.
Well, first of all, you have to have a whole series of them to be perfect for the universe to exist, not just the gravity, a whole series of them. Then you have another whole series which had to be perfect in order that atoms could evolve, that stars could evolve, that life could come into existence. And then you have another whole series which were important, that human beings could come into existence. And what this principle says is that any universe that exists has to be one which is capable of producing creatures able to observe the universe. And so it seems that the universe has a function which is the observation of itself, to evolve creatures like us, and we just happen to be at this time on this planet a creature able to observe and understand the universe. And I'm sure all over the universe there are other creatures, maybe in the past or in the future or even at the same time, who are at this stage of beginning to understand the universe in which they live. So it's almost like the creation was created in order that the creation may understand and observe itself.
Now, I know that scientists interpret these unusual coincidences in very different ways.
Yes. And what I'm talking about here is what's often called the strong anthropic principle. There's another interpretation which is the weak anthropic principle, which says there's nothing significant about this at all. If we can observe the universe, the only universe that we can observe is the one which is absolutely perfect. If it wasn't perfect, we wouldn't be here.
Right.
And it's just a 1 in a zillion chance that this is the universe that exists. I find that more difficult to take than the idea that there's some underlying purpose here in creation. To me, that makes more sense than feeling this is just a 1 in a zillion coincidence that the universe happens to support
Well,
intelligence.
either way you look at it, it means that there's an incredible momentousness about the now moment, because if we lose this chance to put this planet into good working order, so to speak, who knows when the universe will ever be able to create another opportunity.
On this planet, it may, remember, we are only one of a quadrillion possible inhabitable planets.
I think you suggest that you might view this planet as a tiny little rosebud in a
yes, in a huge rose garden. There's other roses blossoming, but we have the responsibility for this particular little rosebud that's blossoming now.
Yes.
And I think if we come back to this idea of the universe discovering itself, we are, I feel, halfway through that process as human beings. We have now got to the stage where we can look down into the depths of an atom, we can understand quantum physics, we are decoding the genetic code, understanding how life operates, we are looking out to the edges of the universe, understanding how the universe came into being. In terms of physical reality, we are almost reaching the limits. Probably 5 or 10 years we'll have a unified field theory, which is sort of the mathematics of creation. The area we've hardly touched upon is ourselves. The human mind is still as mysterious as it was 2,000 years ago. And I think that is the next great frontier, inner space, understanding ourselves. And I think that's the reason we are at the moment messing things up, is we got so focused on the external world, we don't fully understand ourselves.
In fact, it's quite ironic when you think that here we are, the pinnacle of evolution on this planet, this marvelous, fantastically complex, aware being, and we're kind of polluting the place.
Yeah.
To say nothing about the wars, the starvation, the homelessness, the ways in which we treat each other.
Yeah.
It seems quite ironic that such fantastic organisms such as ourselves would be behaving this way.
No other creature does. I think this is the question we have to ask, is why is it, of the millions and millions of species on this planet, one of them, which calls itself the most intelligent species, behaves in such an insane way? Because it is insane to realize, as we now do, that we are destroying our own habitat, and then to continue destroying it is mad. It's insane. And I think we have to look inside ourselves and say, what is it in our thinking, in our attitudes, in our values that leads us to behave in this insane way? And until we do that, until we begin to understand ourselves, I don't think we're going to get out of this problem.
Well, it's not as if the human species hasn't had teachers in the area of self-understanding going back to ancient times. There have been guides and great books written. The accumulated wisdom of humanity in this area is quite significant, and yet it doesn't seem to have stemmed the tide of things.
It's interesting this. I think there have been many, many teachers, and I think they're all underneath saying the same thing. The great teachers, the Christ, the Buddhas, the Mohammeds, and the saints, and even the local greengrocer can be enlightened. There's an underlying wisdom, but we keep on forgetting it. And I think what happens is a teacher comes out with this wisdom and teaches it to people. It's just basically the wisdom of how to act as a mature, selfless, caring, compassionate human being and not get so hung up on things and materiality. And what happens is the teaching gets passed down after the teacher's gone from one person to another, and inevitably it begins to get distorted. Something gets left out, a little bit gets added in, something is misunderstood. And after centuries of this, and it gets absorbed by different cultures, then it's translated from one language to another, it ends up as nothing like it was originally meant, and often it ends up completely upside down. It's the process I sometimes jokingly call truth decay, that over time the truth decays. And so I don't think we can go and look back to what other great teachers have said, because whatever we look back to is a distortion of what they were saying. I think the challenge we are facing today is to rediscover that wisdom for ourselves. And I think this is what is happening on the planet now, particularly in the Western culture. We are just beginning to say, it isn't just about materiality. It isn't about how many yachts you have or how many VCRs you have in your house or how big your bank account is. We're beginning to recognize that that doesn't work. that it doesn't lead us to be more peaceful and more happy in ourselves.
You've written about how throughout human history, each century seems to produce more and more inventions, technological innovations. Perhaps we're at a point now where what we need to produce are more and more enlightened people.
Yes, I definitely think so. More and more, even the word enlightened is loaded. I think more and more wise people, more and more caring, selfless people. People who are not driven by the fears inside themselves, most of the fears that we don't need.
Fears, yes.
Fears, that we have so many fears that what will someone think of me, and oh dear, if I don't have enough money, I'm not going to be secure, I'm going to die or something. These things, this is what corrupts us, I think. And this is why we need to look inside ourselves and begin to become masters of our own minds.
That fear seems to be the heart of what one might think of as the cancer. I mean,
I think it is.
We do destructive things, I suppose, because we're afraid if we don't get our own, we're not going to survive.
I think fear is great in certain situations. If you're about to be run over by a bus, you need fear to get you out of the way, or if someone's going to attack you.
It has survival value.
Exactly. If there's a physical threat.
In a short-term sense, and if there's an immediate danger.
But in our society, those threats are very, very seldom. Maybe once, twice a year, something like that. You need that survival response. And yet we live in fear. We fear each other. We fear what people are going to think of us. We fear, what they're going to think if I wear this sort of thing. We fear, I say, our security. Am I in control of the world? We fear being out of control. These sorts of things. This is, I think, the root of the cancer. And nearly every one of those fears, when you examine it, bring it into the light, is empty. It's an illusion.
So we're at a point in history where maybe through just a shift in attitude, we can begin to get a handle on some of the fundamental reasons why we've been messing things up.
Yes.
Well, Peter Russell, we're out of time right now. This has been a very exciting, stimulating half hour. Thanks so much for being with me.
My pleasure. I've enjoyed it too, greatly.
And for those of you who have enjoyed this half hour with Peter Russell, check your program guide for part 2 of this 2-part series on time and transformation, where we'll be looking at the potential within humanity for positive spiritual change at a greatly accelerated pace. Thank you for being with us. Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. I imagine that by now many of you already realize that in conjunction with White Crow Books, we've just launched the new Thinking Aloud Dialogues book imprint, and our first title is There Life After Death? We've just released issue number 2 of the New Thinking Aloud Quarterly Magazine. You can download a free copy at the New Thinking Aloud Foundation website, newthinkingaloud.org.